Michael is actually a pretty, almost eerily good choice for that song, actually. Even not having any idea what we're talking about, I think we'll see that actually fits in pretty well with what we're discussing this morning. We're glad you're with us. It's a great time to be here. We are thankful for your presence. More than anything, we are overjoyed to be able to be a people who call upon God and are confident that He hears us, that He respects our worship, that He receives it with pleasure. That is a tremendous blessing, a great thing that fortifies us this day and the rest of the days of the week as we move forward from here. But we're thankful that you're with us to participate. Hope that what we have done has honored God and has been useful to you as well. Be opening in your Bibles to Acts chapter 18, if you would. We're going to be spending our time there this morning. We've been, over the last many months, I guess, looking once a month or so at the book of Acts, working our way through it together. And when we were last with Paul in the book of Acts, chapter 17, he was preaching the gospel in the sort of philosophical or intellectual center of the Greek world. He was in the city of Athens, where ideas are created, where philosophy began in many ways, there in Athens. And his next stop that we are taking here in chapter 18 is taking him to the Corinthian isthmus. He's going a little bit west. And here Paul encounters one of the great commercial centers of the ancient world. In Corinth, they buy and sell goods from all over the Roman Empire. They bring in people, they bring in money from every corner. It's a city of great wealth, a city of stratified wealth. You can find some of the most poor, and you can find many of the most wealthy. Corinth is the political capital of the region. It's an important place for that reason, I suppose. But those things, it's great commercial power, it's political importance, those might not be what Corinth was best known for in the first century, around the year 50 AD, when Paul goes there for the first time. The immorality of the city of Corinth was proverbial in antiquity. We may not have really a modern comparison today. We have Sin City, Las Vegas, for instance, but really that's a tourist town. The stereotype doesn't really bleed onto the character of the people as much who just happen to live there. They were born and raised there, and they go somewhere later in life and they say, I'm from Las Vegas. You don't immediately assume this person is a degenerate gambler. You just say, well, he's from Las Vegas, I guess. If you came from Corinth in the first century, people might make assumptions. Even by ancient Greco-Roman standards, it was the place synonymous with sin, synonymous with immorality. When you want a character in a play to be known as a drunk, you make him a Corinthian. And if you have a guy in your play who's a Corinthian, then one of his characteristics has to be that he is a drunk. In particular, sexual immorality was rampant. They had their famous Temple of Venus, Temple of Aphrodite, that is, I suppose, well known, with its 1,000 legendary temple prostitutes who sort of roamed the streets of Corinth. There were multiple forms of words for debauched or immoral people that were essentially, in the language of the time, in Koine Greek, you would just call them a Corinthian. And that might mean they were a prostitute. That might mean that they were a person who slept around. It was a way of referring to a person of loose or no morals. But it is here, in this place, in Corinth, that Paul will spend at least 1.5 years of his life. It is here in Corinth that he will establish a church that, despite its rocky road, remains for many years. It's here in Corinth that Paul will enjoy a relatively peaceful stay that ends on his own terms, instead of with him being forced out of town at the forefront of an angry mob. That's a bit of a rarity overall for Paul. And it is of Corinth that God makes that surprising declaration in verse 10. I have many people in this city. Let's take a brief survey of Paul's stay in Corinth. In the verses leading up to that declaration, I really want to spend most of our time this morning, I guess, on that idea that God brings up, that in Corinth, God says, I have many people in this place. The least expected place, the most immoral place, the most vile, wicked place given over to the devices of Satan himself, but it is here that I have many people, God says. What leads up to that point in Acts chapter 18? Paul, as we mentioned, had arrived from Athens and immediately caught on in the tent-making trade, which he already had done in his life prior to this, but he begins that work anew. He makes friends with a married couple who had recently arrived from Italy. Aquila and Priscilla are their names. They are Jewish Christians. Luke refers in verse 2 to the idea of Claudius expelling Jews from the city of Rome. We know from extra-biblical history this seems to have happened because of disputes over Christianity. Might have been at the root of that. And so Aquila and Priscilla had to flee Italy, as did many other Jews and most likely, well, certainly many other Jewish Christians. They find themselves here in Corinth now. So Paul works during the week at his trade, whatever his part of that process was, if he worked the leather that made the tents or was involved in some other part of it. He occupies himself with that trade 6 days a week. On the Sabbath, on Saturday, he goes to the synagogue and teaches. And here Luke continues his theme that we especially observed in chapter 17 several months ago, where he wants to tell us the nature of Paul's teaching, the nature of this rhetoric that he would use in the synagogue. And he brings this up again here in chapter 18, that it was reasonable, that it appealed to men's reason. He goes through a logical process, not screeching out some kind of invective against people, not going on some tirade, but by process of reason, by calmly, logically, persuasively laying out the facts, proving, as he says again here, that Jesus is the Christ. I will tell you some facts about Jesus, this man who lived here in Galilee and in Nazareth and did these things. I will tell you what the scriptures say about the Christ and the things that he was supposed to have done and did do, and then I will show you that those two things are the same. Jesus, therefore, is the Christ. That was Paul's teaching habit. Well, his companions on this second voyage that he's been separated from for a little while join him from Thessalonica. Timothy and Silas come to Corinth to stay with Paul, getting the band back together again. They have news from Macedonian churches from farther north, good news mostly, especially as it regards Thessalonica and Philippi and places like that. They also bring with them monetary support. Most of that, it seems, from Philippi. Paul remarks on this in his letter to the Philippians later on, that they had supported him healthily from the beginning. And this seems to allow Paul some more freedom in his ministry. He commits even more of his time to that and maybe less of his time to working at the trade because it is no longer as needed. He has this financial support from some of these other churches. Well, the Jewish non-believers end up rejecting him so wholeheartedly that Paul begins an even greater effort among the Greeks, as we see that pattern unfolding time and again throughout the book of Acts. However, he doesn't abandon the Jews entirely. We know this for one reason, based on where Paul sets up as sort of the base of his operations. He moves right next door to the synagogue. That seems to indicate he still has in mind he wants to reach some of those people. If I'm going to be next door to where you always worship, and that's where I'm preaching my lessons, I still want you to come hear them. You're going to walk by it every day. Why not come in and listen? Why not come in and let's discuss some things together? One of the most high-profile Jews in the whole city, the ruler of the synagogue, a man named Crispus, he becomes a Christian along with his whole family. It's at this point that Paul receives his night vision, beginning in verse 9 of Acts 18. We can gather from implication that Paul was, at this time, afraid. Luke doesn't say Paul was afraid, but he records the Lord saying to Paul, "Don't be afraid," which seems to lead us to that conclusion. We might ask, why is Paul afraid right now? We can't say for absolute certain. Maybe things had grown even more contentious with the non-believing Jews. Maybe they would be very upset that Crispus had converted. might be more easily riled because it seems Paul is having more success. He's making more inroads. That's when people get the most upset, when you really seem like you're having some success and they don't want you having that success. He had a mixed record of frustration and victory here in Corinth. Either one of those things could contribute to a sense of unease. And again, I don't know all of why Paul would be feeling so ill at ease in Corinth at this time. But God assures him, "Do not be afraid, but speak, and do not keep silent. For I am with you, and no one will attack you to hurt you, for I have many people in this city." This passage reminds us of God's words to Elijah in 1 Kings 18, when Elijah believes he is all alone among those who honor God. "No one is left but me, Lord," Elijah says. And God must say to him, "No, you are wrong. I have at least 7,000 who have not committed themselves to Baal, but belong to me. I have a prophet Elisha who's going to come after you. I have kings that I'm going to install to do my will. You aren't alone at all. Don't be afraid. Go get back to work." I have many people in this city, the Lord tells him. What can this reminder do for us? I want to especially focus on that phrase from Acts chapter 18 because I think it appropriate to consider in our times. First of all, this reminder gets us to see each other. It's an appropriate thing for Paul to remember here in Corinth, a place where he's certainly not alone, that God has many servants. Paul can lean on Aquila and Priscilla, and certainly he's well aware of their faith and he's well aware of their value to him. He'll write about this on several occasions later in his life. They're his fellow workers. He will say on one occasion, "They risked their necks for my sake." These are vital people. They are useful people in the kingdom of God. And here they are right there in Corinth. Paul has stayed with them. He's with them. That's one reason to not feel alone. He's rejoined while he's in Corinth by Timothy and Silas, as we mentioned. People who have sat in prison cells with Paul. People who have voyaged to difficult areas with Paul. Men cut from the same cloth, men with like minds and like courage. He can look at those brothers in arms and know that he is not alone. Paul has a new ally in Corinth. He has this man Crispus we've mentioned a moment ago, a prominent man, someone who no doubt has great knowledge of God. He has the respect of his people. He has brought many souls to Christ along with himself. Paul could look to his immediate companions and be comforted that it isn't just me out there. Can we not do likewise? To know the blessing of each other. If nothing else, the knowledge that here in this place and in virtually every corner of the world, there are people who want to follow Christ and are doing so. That's a great consolation. When you are tempted to feel fear, dejection, stress, loneliness as a Christian, whatever it might be, to know that you are not alone. That many people in this city belong to the Lord. Again, especially through the lens of where Paul is, you have to consider that if anywhere would make you feel alone, would make you feel like the world had just totally given itself over to wickedness, that there was no one with any morality, there was no one with any decency, there was no one with anything that could be attractive to God or to man, you would have that feeling in Corinth. But it's there that God says, "You're not alone. I'm going to take care of you." When we are tempted to feel that same feeling, that same fear, be reminded of each other, take note of the good work that others do. Take note of the persistence through trials that others display. Take encouragement from each other. This reminder helps us in that regard. Even more than that, let's say secondly, that this statement from God cuts through the factions and the prejudices that are so often a part of our experience in this life and can be a part of our experience as Christians. Many have noted before that all the problems the church in Corinth was famous for, and there are several. When you read 1 and 2 Corinthians, they had their issues. We can be honest about that. But really, all of the problems they faced were problems the city itself was known for. We've already mentioned the rampant sexual immorality in Corinth. The church struggled with that. We've mentioned the extreme stratification of wealth, where you have haves and have-nots. The church struggled with that. And you see a spirit of being factious, of dividing off into different camps and parties, splintering into various schools and movements and teams, pushing one agenda or view or esteemed celebrity philosopher or teacher or politician, where you say, I'm with this guy, I belong to this movement. That was a problem in the city, and it became a problem in the church. I'm of Cephas, I'm of Apollos, I'm of Paul, I'm of Christ. But notice that God's statement avoids that by just cutting right through it. His description of those on his side is simple. What does he say he has in Corinth? People. I've got people. He uses a term, the Greek term used there, laos, is a general term. It's broad. It's well translated by our English equivalent, people. We use that in a very general sense. It just means more than one person. You got two folks there, you got people. And that's the term that's used here by Luke, by God. It might be interesting that this term is used somewhat commonly to specify the people of God in both the New Testament and in the Greek translation of the Old. But it is this very broad idea. It's not ethnos, it's not referring to a race of people. It's not some specific term that deals with outsiders or that deals with citizens of a particular place or any specific type or group of persons. It's just people. God doesn't tell Paul, I have many Jews in this city. I have many Greeks in this city. He doesn't say, I have many wealthy and prominent citizens. He doesn't say, I have many recently immigrated tradespeople. He doesn't say, I have many men. He doesn't say, I have many women. He simply says, I've got many people. When I find them, what will they look like? Paul might ask. If you got many people, who are they? Which ones? Well, they look like people in all the different ways that we find ourselves. Maybe we gain new appreciation or a fresh reminder for the fact that God gives very few demographic specifics when he discusses his people. In fact, we could say he gives none at all because he includes all of them. If you love the Lord, if you follow Christ, you're his people. It doesn't matter what you look like, where you come from, what language you speak, what your education is, male, female, young, old, all of those things. God simply says, I have people here. We would be wise to follow his lead and simply look for the people of God, to whatever type of person that might take us. Now, along those same lines, let's continue with this thought, that this reminder will embolden one for evangelism, for bringing the gospel to those people, whoever they might be. Let's notice the context when Paul hears this in Acts 18. Yes, there already are Christians in Corinth. We saw in verse 8, when Crispus and his household were baptized, Luke gave the note there that many of the Corinthians, hearing, believed and were baptized. So whatever many means, and I have no idea what it means, it could, if you have 20 people in my living room, that feels like many people. If you have 20 people in a city of 750,000 like Corinth, well, that doesn't feel like so many. So I don't know what many means in this case. But it's quite a few. It feels successful. It feels like things are moving in the right direction. So we already have many Christians. But the way Luke frames this, and the way God speaks of it in verses 9 and 10, sounds as though God is talking in a somewhat future sense. It's why he wants Paul to keep working, to keep speaking with boldness, because I have many people here. That's why I want you to not be afraid and to keep going. He doesn't just say to Paul, you know that I have many people here. You've met them. You're responsible for them being here already, so remember that. Comfort though they might have been, Paul had more allies beyond Priscilla, Aquila, Timothy, Silas, Crispus, and the rest. More than he knew at the time, it seems, because he continues to work for 18 months of regular teaching, where no doubt many more are added. So we're confronted with the likelihood, if not the absolute certainty, that many of these many in verse 10 weren't yet Christians when God is talking about them. It reminds us of Jesus' statement in John 10. Carson read this for us before I came up here. In John chapter 10, where Jesus says, "Other sheep I have which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. There are some that belong to me, that will know my voice when they hear it. They will join my flock when I call them." But they're not here yet. They'll come later. This was his knowledge that many would follow. Well, who? They're not here yet. They haven't joined the flock, but they will. It seems that same spirit that God is saying this in verse 10. I have many people in this city. Well, what are all their names? Where do all of them live? You don't know that yet, Paul. Don't be afraid. Keep speaking. Don't be silent. Continue the work. Can you imagine? Try to really think. Try to put yourself in Paul's shoes, in his brain, what that would do to your zeal for the gospel, your zeal for evangelism, as he walks the city streets afterward, having been told this by God. He knows that God has many people in the city who might remain unknown for now to Paul himself, but yet God claims as his, as a part of his flock. What would you think with each person you walked past? Is it that guy? Oh, is she one of them? Well, how would you know? How would you be certain? How do any of us know if a person is God's unless we give them the opportunity? Unless we speak to them about him? Unless we put those two parties in contact with each other if they previously have not been? This would seem to imbue one with a sense of urgency, a sense of excitement about trying to figure out, who are those people God was talking about? I want to go find them all. Do we allow this certainty that we must have? I would be convicted of this same idea that there are many in the world, there are many in this city who will belong to God, who I guess we could say now belong to God, but don't know him yet, don't follow him yet. But they will. How will they get there? Maybe not unless I find them. Maybe not unless I speak to them. Maybe not unless I inspire a love and a zeal for the Lord within them. Paul is used as an instrument to that end. Can we be utilized to similar effect? Final thought I want to consider this morning. This statement from God reminds us of God's ultimate control. We see the interesting way in which God's pronouncement actually comes to pass. Remember, he's told Paul not to be afraid of an attack from enemies. That was the essential part that he really began with, is to say, don't be afraid. No one's going to hurt you. I'm going to prevent you from being harmed in this case. That's the basic encouragement given here, protection from harm. But at some point in that 18 months, Paul is briefly in danger. That begins in verse 11. The non-believing Jews finally band together with enough aggravation and antipathy towards Paul that they storm the bema, they storm the judgment seat of Gallio, the proconsul. Gallio himself, chapter 18 of Acts is pretty good for compiling historical records and evidence. Gallio is a pretty famous man. He's the brother of Seneca. He is a friend of emperors. He's someone whose name is known both in the Bible and outside of it, and in ways that connect the Bible to outside history. Has been known for 2,000 years, I suppose. And this mention here helps us know that the events likely took place between July of 51 AD and July of 52 AD. That's about the time Gallio was in the city of Corinth. But it's this man who ends up being the instrument of God's faithfulness. Actually being the channel through which God carries out that promise that no one will attack you to hurt you. Paul was told he'd been taken care of. He would be taken care of. But now that threat is put on the table in a very real and concrete way. You have an angry mob coming to the leader of the place saying, get rid of Paul, he's doing some bad stuff. This guy's a troublemaker. This guy's going to bring us all down. This guy needs to be dealt with. Well, who defends Paul? It isn't a miracle. It isn't a rescue by an angel. It isn't a rescue launched by bold fellow saints. It's an unaffiliated pagan from Cordova who is just executing his role as a Roman politician statesman. It's just Gallio exercising his good sense and saying, this seems like an argument about Judaism, and I don't care about arguments about Judaism. Take it somewhere else. You're not going to hurt this guy. He hasn't broken any laws. I don't think that is the main thrust of what God was telling Paul in the first place by saying, I have many people in this city. I do think the idea of God having many people in Corinth was more to tell Paul that although the city looked like it belonged to the devil, he should also expect to find many souls who belong to God. And he could take strength from that in the ways that we've mentioned. But I think also we can't avoid this additional reminder that God's resources also include these people who almost unwittingly do his will or forward his plan. Gallio is a part of the framework that keeps Paul safe. Those things happen according to God's will. Well, this is far from a guarantee in every situation, and we shouldn't take it as that. God has never promised nor intended to remove all suffering and all peril from this life. Here in Corinth, he tells Paul, you won't be harmed. But he didn't save Paul from being stoned almost to death in his first journey. He doesn't keep him from being shipwrecked. He doesn't keep him ultimately from being executed. Bad things might happen. Bad things will happen. Paul himself will say to the Christians, it is through many tribulations that we must enter the kingdom of God. That, if anything, has been God's promise to his people. But it's useful to remember, based on his specific promise here to the apostle, that the one with all power is ultimately our God. If he says, I will protect you, he will protect you. If he says you need to be ready for danger, then you need to be ready for danger. If he says that he will give you life, he will give you life. His promises are steadfast. His power is absolute. I think his reminder and the way through which he brings this about is instructive to that end in Corinth from Acts 18. As we close this morning, consider again that statement I've harped on so much already. I have many people in this city. God had many people in Corinth. I believe he has many people in Tulsa or Broken Arrow or wherever you are, I don't know. Wherever you might be visiting from today. We have some folks from out of town, from out of state. I would be willing to guess that he has many people there. The questions in ascending order of importance we must ask ourselves. Do we look for those other people who belong to God? Do we take strength from those other people who belong to God? But at the tip of that pyramid of importance is this. Are you yourself one of those people who belong to God in this city? When he says, I have many people, are you one of them? If you are not, but want to be, you can be. The willingness to follow God is the great separator of men. It is the great determiner of destiny. Do you want to follow Jesus? To go anywhere with him, no matter what might be imperiling that path? If this morning you have committed to that path, do what these folks did in Acts 18 that we just read about. When they heard the gospel, they believed and were baptized. When they were given the opportunity to follow the Lord, they took it. They became his people. They became those who served him with their all and won a great name as a result of it, as our forebears in the faith. This morning, continue that legacy of obedient faith and become a Christian if you have the need. Repent and be baptized. If we can help you with prayers, help you struggling along a path, help you in a world that does seem given over to the enemy, we can remind you of our presence, of our strength, and our care for you by praying with you. If we can offer any assistance this morning, we'd love to do that. We invite you merely